Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Brian Selesky. I am the CEO of a company called Argo AI, a local robotics company that is partnered with Ford and Volkswagen to bring self-driving vehicles to market. As a longtime resident in the Pittsburgh area, a graduate of the University of Pittsburgh and a former employee and special faculty member of Carnegie Mellon's Robotics Institute, I'm proud to have founded Argo and made Pittsburgh Argo's headquarters, and to be part of the thriving business community and growing tech sector in the city. I'm excited to join you today to kick off both the Chamber's 2020 virtual Washington, D.C. fly-in, as well as your new chair of the Greater Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. I'd like to thank Morgan O'Brien for his leadership as the previous chamber chair, and I look forward to getting to know all of you as we work to advance the issues that will move us forward to be a more competitive and inclusive region. While this year's fly-in may look different, the need to share our regional message directly to our elected officials in Washington, D.C. does not. The team at the Chamber has prepared a series of panels to discuss issues that are vital to move our region's economy and quality of place forward with our elected officials and important partners. The goal is to help build on some of the Chamber's key results toward our overall policy objectives. This is why our panels have been structured around some of our most important issues, things like transportation and infrastructure, sustainability in our energy future, our tech and innovation economy, and criminal justice reform. As we discuss each of these issues, we are exploring the best way to move them forward through a lens of equity for all citizens and communities in our region. I want to thank the team at the Chamber for pivoting this event from in-person to virtual. 2020 has been quite unique, and Matt and the team at the Chamber have done a fantastic job in these challenging times. I also want to thank our sponsors. Without their help and support, this event would not be possible. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. I hope you find these panels engaging, informative, and helpful. And once again, I look forward to working with you in advancing the interests of our great Pittsburgh region. I'll turn it over from here to Matt Smith.
Thank you very much, Brian, and we're all very much looking forward to working with you in your new position as the chair of our chamber board. So thank you very much, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here today.
Thank you.
I would be remiss if we didn't start out this discussion, and in fact our entire virtual DC fly-in, if we didn't recognize the life, the incredible life, and the passing of an American legal giant, an American trailblazer, and an American icon, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I think it would be appropriate for all of us to just take a brief moment to recognize the life and passing of Justice Ginsburg with a moment of silence right now. Thank you. Our thoughts and prayers are certainly with Justice Ginsburg's family and her friends and everyone across our nation who looked up to Justice Ginsburg for inspiration. It really is an amazing loss. And you know, we all know the unparalleled impact she had on our nation, on our nation's laws, on equity within our nation, both in her term on the Circuit Court and the U.S. Supreme Court, and also well before that, as a practicing attorney. But I've really been struck by the stories of her friendships with jurists on many sides of the aisle, on the other side of the aisle, and who are polar opposites of Justice Ginsburg in terms of their legal opinions. But they were able to have a robust dialogue on the issues of the day in a respectful and graceful manner. And neither side budged. It wasn't with these friendships, particularly the one with Justice Scalia, was not a friendship born out of a lack of strong will or a lack of convictions. And in fact, the friendships were really enhanced by those convictions that each side had in the debates and arguments that they had. And I've just been really struck by that over the last couple of days. You know, each side knew that the testing of those arguments made each side better and made their own position stronger. And the way that they did it while maintaining those friendships, I think is a wonderful example for all of us. And so With that, I'm very excited to kick off our virtual DC Fly. And as Brian said, we would normally be meeting with all of you and our federal partners in Washington, DC. We'd be visiting the Hill in person. We'd be, of course, visiting Bullfeathers, and you just don't get the Bullfeathers experience via Zoom. And I think we can all attest to that. But as Brian said, our team here at the Pittsburgh Chamber has done an amazing job of putting together a robust series of discussions on the issues that are vital for the Pittsburgh region, from infrastructure to the opportunity that we have in our region to increase the velocity of our tech-based and innovation economic development. And we're discussing those issues with key federal partners, our key members of the congressional delegation, individuals like Neil Bradley, who I'll bring on here in a second, because we know that there is a critical federal role in each of these areas for the Pittsburgh region's economy to succeed and for our quality of life to improve. And we want to make sure that we're engaged in these robust discussions with our federal partners. You're also going to hear, as Brian said, these issues discussed with equity embedded into each of them, because we know our region will not succeed if opportunity is not shared by all of our neighbors. And so with that, I'm very happy to bring on Neil Bradley. Neil is the Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Neil's going to open up with a few opening remarks, and then we will open it up for a question and answer period. I would just note, if you have any questions, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. So without further delay, I'll turn it over to Neil.
Well, thank you, Matt, and congratulations to you, Brian. It's always a pleasure to be with our friends in Pittsburgh. For those of you who aren't aware, Matt serves as a part of a small group of CEOs of state and local chambers across the country who advise the U.S. Chamber about what's going on outside of Washington, so we can be your best advocates here in Washington. And so we're especially grateful with our partnership with the Pittsburgh Chamber and with Matt. Let me just spend a couple minutes talking about the state of the economy, a couple policy issues, and I just really want to get to your questions and to your thoughts. I think Brian said something about 2020 being an unusual year. That might be the understatement of the decade, if not the century. None of us were anticipating or planning for much of this, but certainly not a once-in-a-century global pandemic. And if you rewind back to this spring, we were thinking about and hoping for what we thought would be a very swift contraction as we shut down parts of the economy to arrest the spread of COVID, and then a fairly quick recovery. We talked frequently about a V-shaped economy, a sharp decline in economic activity, followed by a sharp rebound to get back to where we were. Well, now 6, coming up on 7 months later, it looks very different. And in some ways, some of our worst fears have not come to pass, but in other ways, some of our fondest aspirations also haven't come to pass. Today, we currently describe at the U.S. Chamber the state of the economy as a K-shaped. A K-shaped because different parts of the economy are moving in different directions. If you think about the letter K, and you have the decline that goes down, and then you have the part of the K that comes up and the part of the K that comes down. The upper part of the K looks a lot like the V. And today across America, there are different industries, sectors, and individual businesses who have not only fully recovered from where they were in the spring, they're actually ahead and advancing. And so if you think about things like construction and professional services and financial services, employment, the employment losses that we saw in the spring have fully recovered. If you think about individual companies, we read about Walmart and Amazon and Target adding hundreds of thousands of new employees to meet changing demand. Then we think about our local restaurants, and we think about music venues and theaters. Those folks are at the bottom end of the K. You know, if you're in the leisure and hospitality industry, 1 in 4 jobs that existed in February is currently unfilled. Many of those businesses will likely not reopen, and there's going to be a great distortion and dislocation in that sector of the economy and for those individuals who used to be employed in those sectors, which creates a very interesting time for policymakers as we think about how to respond. The folks who are on the top end of the K, who've recovered, they're doing just fine. But the folks on the bottom end of the K, the folks who will never be able to fully recover until we have a vaccine or we're able to open without social distancing requirements, those folks run a risk that the bridge that we thought that we were building them in the CARES Act has now become a pier, and that they're going to fall off that pier. And so one of the things that we're focused on in Washington is what we're calling a targeted and timely assistance package, a new phase 4 relief bill that isn't nearly as broad as what we considered back in the spring, but it's designed to help those businesses in those sectors who continue to face disruption, provides them an extension of relief to get them into the new year, and focuses on those individuals who used to work in those sectors who need assistance with continued unemployment, but also in many instances in job retraining and job skills to find those new jobs and to relocate into those new jobs that are being created. Our belief is that if Washington can kind of get its act together and do a targeted assistance package that includes a new round of PPP for small businesses who are experiencing revenue loss, an expansion of the employee retention tax credit, targeted unemployment benefits combined with job training programs, as well as a liability shield to protect employers who are in the process of reopening and don't need to worry about litigation, that if we can assemble that type of package, that we can bridge this period and come out stronger on the other side in 2021. Which is the second point I want to make and really get to why I think your agenda in this virtual fly-in is so important. Whatever our future economy looks like, the one thing we know is it's not going to look at the same as what we left. That this is a disrupting event, and just like we have disruptors in the marketplace, we can have exogenous disruptive events, and the pandemic is one of them. And part of our responsibility as business leaders is to figure out how we rebuild not to what was, but what needs to be built in the future. And as we think about that, there are really critical key things that the pandemic has opened our eyes to that we need to be responsive to. For example, broadband and telecommunications. I don't know what the status of the school systems in terms of in-person learning are there in Pittsburgh, but in most places across the country, we have kids who are not permanently back full-time in school. Your ability to get an education is really tied to your access to broadband and the internet. We know that the businesses who have innovated the most are the ones who've been able to leverage technology in this moment, and providing access to that technology is going to be really important. We also know that infrastructure is long overdue, not just rebuilding to what we have, but building something for the future that takes into account that we want diverse local economies, like you're trying to do there and are doing in Pittsburgh with respect to becoming a tech hub, in addition to kind of the previous centers of excellence that you've had in that city. And so as we think about heading into 2021, building up those policies and thinking about how we do things like infrastructure, how we do things like broadband, how we recognize that some individuals and some areas are going to be the last to reopen and the last to recover, and helping them move further along in that process so that we really do have a quality of opportunity in seizing this new economy is going to be really important. And so I think thinking about the future and kind of the topics that you're talking to your federal lawmakers about today is as equally important as pressing them on finishing the work of today, which is getting that package done, that relief package done, but then turning their attention to the future and how we make the smart investments that are going to get us where we need to go. With that, let me turn back to Matt, and I know he has a few questions, and folks in the audience may as well, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and your questions.
Thank you, Neil. And you did a great job of laying out the case as to why action at the federal level is so necessary, particularly for those small businesses that need that bridge to get to the other side of the pandemic. What's your sense, particularly with the complicated politics in Washington right now? What's your sense that something happens over the next 6 to 7 weeks before the election, Is there a chance something happens on additional CARES Act or stimulus, if you will, legislation after the election, or is this something that is likely to be pushed into next year? What's your sense of the politics and how it all plays out over the next 6-7 weeks?
Yeah, so we've kind of reached this kind of critical moment. So, the House of Representatives passed a bill back in May. The Senate Republicans put forward a proposal at the beginning of August and then had a vote that was a party line vote, much like the House vote was a party line vote, except different majorities in the House and the Senate a couple weeks ago. As of yet, we don't have any proposal that can pass both the House and the Senate and be signed into law. From our perspective, the contours of a package are there. And in fact, early last week, I think it was last Tuesday, a group called the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is made up of an equal number of Republicans and Democrats in the House, unveiled what they called a kind of middle ground approach. And it was about $1.5 trillion. It included the extension of the Paycheck Protection Program, unemployment benefits, targeted assistance to state and local governments, the liability protection for employers that I mentioned, that we think actually represents the contours of a fair compromise between the party that could be signed into law. You heard immediately after they released that, Mark Meadows, the White House Chief of Staff, praising it and offering support for it as kind of a contour. You heard House Democratic leadership, particularly in their committee chairman, saying it was insufficient, but a lot of rank and file House Democratic members actually endorsing and saying we need to get moving on something like this. We were expecting a little bit of movement this week in the Senate, although Justice Ginsburg's death has kind of taken the focus, at least for this week, kind of off of those negotiations. In one respect, it's kind of deviated people's attention here in Washington. In another respect, it may have extended the timeline for action. Our best analysis, given all the weekend's events, is that there's about 2 to 3 weeks for Congress to come together and pass a deal before the election. That there is probably a 40 to 45% chance that they do that. That what happens over the next couple of weeks, what they hear, what lawmakers hear when they hear from their constituents back home, will determine whether those odds increase or fall. But if they don't get something done in the next 3 weeks, then nothing is going to happen until the new year, until there's a new Congress, and whatever the results are of the presidential election, whether the president has a second term or Vice President Biden is being sworn in January. And so it's either now in the next 3 weeks, or we're waiting until next year. And I think our goal as part of the business community is to help improve those odds that something gets done in the next 3 weeks.
Thank you. I just want to remind everyone, if you want to submit questions, and we've got a couple, use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you're interested in submitting questions. I've just got one more before we pivot over to some of our submitted questions. And this is a little bit of a different area, Neil, but the chamber recently has been very much in the news for the endorsement, or around the endorsement of some of the House Democratic members of Congress. And I thought that there was a piece in the Wall Street Journal that William Galston wrote, that it was based on an interview that he had with you, discussing the chamber's rationale around some of those endorsements. So I was wondering, can you take us through a little bit of the thought process there and what you're thinking in that space?
Absolutely. So we're not a partisan organization at the U.S. Chamber. We have one interest, that's advancing the interests of the free enterprise system and the business community that we are fortunate to count as members, and creating an environment where we can get greater economic growth, more business creation, more job creation. And in an ideal world, our agenda cuts across every party's lines, because every party, every Democrat, every Republican ought to be interested in the same goals that we're interested in. For over 40 years, we've had a process where it comes to political endorsements, where for incumbent members of Congress, we look at their record. So there are a whole number of votes across all the issues that we work on that come up every Congress that we key vote, that we say, this is something we want to see passed, we're key voting in favor of it, this is something we're opposed to, we hope it doesn't pass. And then we tabulate how members do. And, just like there's no one person that you agree with on everything, there's no one incumbent member of Congress who agrees with the chamber on everything. And so what we look for is the people who more often than not are voting and taking actions to advance the business community's priorities. And so we set a threshold of 70%. For the last 4 decades, if you've been above 70% on our scorecard and you're an incumbent member of Congress, then we support you. Now, the parties tend to shift over time a little bit back and forth. Many of you may remember back in the 90s, Blue Dog Democrats, and there were quite a contingent of them who often voted to advance the business community's priorities. Many of them in some of these wave elections were displaced. Some of them have come back, some of them remain. The parties are a little bit fluid. For us, however, what remains constant is looking for those folks who are working with us. And so when we tabulated the totals this year, it turns out that there are 30 House Democrats, 23 of whom are freshmen, who scored greater than 70% with us based on their votes on trade issues, their votes on repealing some of the taxes from the Affordable Care Act, some of their actions on making it easier for small businesses to utilize small claims court essentially to defend their property interests. So across those whole series of votes. Also quite a few Republicans, in fact, about 192 Republicans who scored above 70% with us. And so our process being consistent is if you've been with us more than 70% of the time, we're going to endorse you. Part of that theory is that, and this is what I explained in that interview with Bill Galston, is that from a business community standpoint, from a U.S. Chamber standpoint, we have to be in a position where we treat everyone honestly and fairly based on their records, and in a position where we can work with whatever the majorities are that are elected or whomever the president is who is elected to help kind of drive these critical issues forward. And when you think about the current polarized environment that we exist in, a polarized environment isn't necessarily good for creating the conditions for business growth and for solving problems. And so we really do want to work with people who are in the center of each party, who are interested in governing and helping us solve problems, and who are willing to cast the votes to get that done. And that's what drove this year's endorsements. It's what drives our overall strategy. As one of my colleagues says, we're not on the Republican train, we're not on the Democrat train, we're on the getting stuff done for the business community train. And if you want to help us get that train moving and be part of that train, then we want to work with you. And these are the members on both sides of the aisle who did that. And so we're proud to stand up and support them.
Thank you. And one question that we received from some folks who have actually texted me and are interested in this particular area is sort of fits into the overall thrust of our organization. As you know, Neil, we are a chamber that operates on behalf of the Pittsburgh region. And we very much work with the various affiliates that we're part of through the Allegheny Conference on Community Development. So for example, the Pittsburgh Regional Alliance is part of our organization, and that's the economic development arm of the organization. And one of the areas that they've long focused on for business attraction and investment, not only, or not to mention quality of life, is the aspect of infrastructure and transportation. And this will come up on one of our panels later today at 1:30. We're very honored to have Congressman Lamb with us for that panel. And so, when they go out, when the Pittsburgh Regional Alliance goes out and recruits business and recruits talent, and retains talent in this region, the issue of transportation investment, connectivity, mobility, comes up at very much the fulcrum of those two issues: improving the economy as well as improving our quality of life in this region. As you know, there is a robust, not only federal role, but state and local role within that context. And I'm just wondering if you could provide us with a little bit of an update on what you see happening in DC, if anything, over the last quarter of this year within the transportation context, particularly around the Highway Trust Fund, renewal of the FAST Act, funding that is necessary to be flowing out to the states for particularly the highway and road projects, but also, the idea of a large-scale infrastructure bill. And as you mentioned, Neil, one of the real issues that have come to the forefront in terms of a gap that exists in many of our communities is broadband connectivity. And so we look at infrastructure, through a very broad lens to include not only transportation, public transportation, broadband connectivity. Where do you see the opportunities around a large-scale infrastructure bill? Again, whether it's this year, whether it's early next year, and why is that such a tough issue to get through in Congress when, by all appearances, it's something that has bipartisan support, it has business community support, it has the labor community support. I know I've thrown a lot in there, but why is that such a tough issue for our friends in Congress to push across the goal line?
Yeah, great questions. Let me start with the current status. So at the end of this month, when the fiscal year expires, the FAST Act, which is the current highway surface transportation transit bill, expires. We expect that Congress, before the end of the month, will pass a one-year extension and will provide the necessary funding to keep funding level. Because gas tax receipts have been declining, we actually are not taking enough money in right now to support our current levels of spending. So they're going to backfill out of the general fund of the Treasury money to keep spending at current levels for the next year. But we're already not investing enough in infrastructure to the point that you raised. And so one of my great frustrations is despite all the bipartisan talk, and there is a lot of bipartisan talk and support for infrastructure, the willingness of folks on both sides of the aisle to roll up their sleeves and say, I'm going to make the compromises necessary to get this done, just haven't been prevalent. That it's a great talking point, but finding folks who are willing to make the compromises to turn the talk into reality just hasn't occurred. What do I mean by that? There are some issues on the spending side, but frankly fewer. Some of them include this debate about whether resiliency or green infrastructure should be part of an infrastructure package, whether it should be the traditional highways, roads, transit, bridges, that's it, or whether it should take a more expansive view. The truth is that between doing the same thing we've always done and doing some of the fairly, what's the right word, robust, to put it politely, wish list, there's a compromise in the middle that says we can focus on priority investments and think creatively about how to do this. And then there's a need for compromise on the revenue side. So, there's no free lunch here. The money's got to come from somewhere, and both parties have got to. We've made suggestions at the U.S. Chamber about how to pay for it. We've suggested indexing the gas tax and to catch up with inflation. But if you don't like that approach, there are lots of other approaches. The key is that we just got to make the compromises and the decisions necessary to make that investment. My hope is that this one-year extension that I mentioned just a moment ago provides enough room in this new year and this new Congress to make those compromises and get it done. Let me give you one other key reason. We all know what we need in infrastructure. I'll give you one other key reason. I mentioned at the very beginning, those folks who are at the bottom side of the K, jobs who may not be coming back, in industries that may not be coming back. One of the biggest problems we had in construction at the beginning of this year is that the construction companies couldn't find people for the jobs they had open, for the jobs that they already had. This is a tremendous opportunity in a moment to think about how, in partnership with labor, we find individuals who can make a career out of construction and building our nation's infrastructure, and how as a part collectively we make the investment to actually do the building, and we create the jobs and we help train the people to take those jobs that really are going to propel us into the future. That's the opportunity. And if we can find folks to seize it at the beginning of this of 2021, I think it'll pay dividends for decades to come. But that's the challenge we have before us.
Thank you, Neil. I know we're bumping up against our time. I just want to flip it back to you for any closing comments and again, an appreciation from us for helping us kick off this virtual fly-in today.
Well, let me just say thank you. You know, the easiest thing to do in the world is to say, well, it's a pandemic, we can't travel, and advocacy falls by the wayside. What you guys are doing is incredibly important. You know, when we talked about infrastructure, but some of the things we didn't talk about are technologies, right? And the rules of the road for technology. Washington has, if we want to develop data ecosystems and artificial intelligence and do all the things that we know that the future opportunity commands, we need Washington engaged in writing rules of the road that work. And, you know, nature abhors a vacuum in anything, and that includes in public policy. And so when Washington has become dysfunctional and hasn't figured out ways to compromise, what happens is that internationally, Europe sets the rules of the road, or domestically, California writes the rules of the road. I suspect the good folks of Pittsburgh really don't want to outsource all artificial intelligence and data privacy regulation to the people in Sacramento. But unless Congress gets involved, that's exactly what's happening and what has been happening. So that's why it's so important that you guys are talking to your federal lawmakers and encouraging them to figure out how they tackle these tough issues, not just for the benefit of Pittsburgh and for Pennsylvania, but really for the whole nation. So with that, let me just say thank you. It's a pleasure to see you again, Matt. Congratulations to Brian, and I really look forward to continuing to work with all of you.
Thank you very much, Neil. And again, we really appreciate your time, and thank you to Brian Selesky, our new chair, for kicking off this virtual fly-in. We're, as I said, we're very much looking forward to tapping into Brian's expertise and his knowledge in moving particularly the tech-based economic development forward within the Pittsburgh region. Stay with us. At 1:30, we're going to have our next panel, which is the Transportation and Infrastructure panel. We will be joined, as I said, by Congressman Connor Lamb, Christina Cassotis, CEO of the Allegheny County Airport Authority, Vincent Valdez, CEO and Executive Director of the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, our local metropolitan planning organization, and Robert Morris University President, Dr. Chris Howard. So that panel will kick off at 1:30. At 4 o'clock, we will have our Sustainability and Energy panel with our federal partner, Congressman Mike Doyle, Steve Malnight, CEO of Duquesne Light Company, Kelly Speaks Backman, CEO of the U.S. Energy Storage Association, and Brandon Mendoza, Executive Director of NAIOP Pittsburgh. So tune in for one or both of those panels. Again, we have tailored these to be very well connected to our Pittsburgh region's agenda and what will propel us forward, both on the economic side and the quality of life side. So thanks again for joining us today. We'll see you at 1:30. Thank you.